Hi, friends. Miss Hickey here. And today we're going to talk about how to use Academic Search Complete to find scholarly sources for your paper. All right, when you're on the library homepage, you'll scroll down just a little bit, and right under that big search box, the first button you see, it's kind of red, is going to be for Academic Search Complete. And that is what we're going to work with today. All right, so if you're off campus, use your Columbia College email address and password. All right, so you can see this looks a lot different than Opposing Viewpoints did, and it works a lot differently too. But once you get the hang of Academic Search Complete, you can use about 80% of our library databases because they're all owned by this company called EBSCOhost. So you can see over the search box, we're searching Academic Search Complete. So once you get further into college and start using some of the other databases that all look like this one, you're going to want to pay attention to what it says above the search box so you know which database you're in, because different databases get their articles from different journals and different newspapers. So even though they look the same, they have different information inside. So it's like a big filing cabinet where, you open it up, it all looks the same, but once you start digging through papers, you notice that every single drawer is different. All right. The biggest thing to remember about the databases is this search box does not work like Google does. We can't type in, why is single-use plastic bad for the environment, and get an answer. So what we want to do is we want to use 2 to 3 keywords. So you'll find those by looking at your thesis statement or thinking about what question you're trying to answer and pull the biggest words out of there. So if I want to know why is single-use plastic bad for the environment, the biggest words are plastic, environment, and maybe single use. And then we want to think of synonyms for those. So the most difficult thing about doing research is figuring out which keywords are going to work to get you the results that you need. Now you're going to link those keywords together with what's called Boolean operators. So let's take a moment to talk about those before we jump into the database any further. The two big Boolean operators are and or. So we're going to start with and. And is a way to link your keywords to get more specific results. Okay, and so because they're more specific, you get fewer results, which is not always a bad thing. This way you don't have to sift through so many different results, and what you get is actually more related to what you're looking for. So for example, I could say South Carolina and heart disease. And because of that and, the results that I'm going to get are going to be in the Venn diagram where they overlap. So if an article is just about South Carolina or just about heart disease, I won't get that. But if the two topics overlap, then that will show up in my search results. Now, if I add another and, then I'm going to get even fewer results. So if I say South Carolina and heart disease and diet, then I get even less results because I only get where all 3 overlap. Okay, so it's that little dark spot in the middle there. Now, on the flip side, if I needed more results, I could use the operator or. This broadens my results. So it's good to use for synonyms like climate change or global warming. You wouldn't necessarily want to use it if you were saying airplanes or dogs, because those have nothing to do with each other at all. And you're going to get overwhelmed with the number of results because it could be any article about airplanes or any article about dogs, and there's just a lot going on. So that would be best for two separate searches. But or is good for synonyms. So going back to my Venn diagram, I would get any article about climate change or any article about global warming, whether it has both of those terms in it or not. So everything in my Venn diagram. If I added another or, so if I wanted to say or climate crisis, I would get even more results because I'm getting anything in any of those three circles. So that's why I say be careful with or. It's easy to get overwhelmed with results when you're using that, but it definitely does come in handy. Now that we know what Boolean operators are and how they work, let's take a look at what that actually looks like in the database. So I'm going to start with just a simple search. So maybe I say climate change. All right, so we can see that that is a pretty big search. We have 77,000 results. In the world of Google, that's not a terribly large amount, but in the world of databases, that is a pretty huge number. And right now we've got it limited to only full text. So we're only getting results where we have the full text access to those articles. So let's take a look at a search using Boolean operators. So I'm going to say or global warming. And remember, or equals more because we're saying we can have either of these in our search results. So we go from 77,000 to 83,000. So these results might have global warming, they might have climate change, they may have both, but it has to have at least one of those. Now let's see what it had looked like if I had used an and. So if I said climate change and plastic. So instead of the 77,000 results that I had with just climate change, I'm all the way down to 299 results because every result has to be about climate change and it has to be about plastic. And if it only has one of those, then it's not showing up in our results. Now we can combine and or into a single search. This is getting a little bit fancy, so you don't have to do this if you're not comfortable with it. But let's just take a look really quick. So I'm going to put climate change or global warming in parentheses. I'm going to say and plastic outside of the parentheses. Now, side note here, I capitalize and or. That's the way that I was taught to do the searches. The databases no longer require you to have those capitalized for it to work. But if you want to use the search box on the library homepage, that one does require you to have and or capitalized to work. So it's just a good habit to get into. Okay. So with climate change or global warming and plastic, I have 342 results. So this is more than I had with just climate change and plastic, but it's still way, way less than I had with climate change or global warming. So let's talk about what's going on here. In this search, I'm searching for any results that have climate change and plastic, or any results that have global warming and plastic. Okay, so it's kind of distributing out. So if it helps you visualize, I could have done plastic and global warming. You see it's the same number, so it doesn't really matter which order I put it in. So I have plastic and climate change, plastic and global warming. So it has to have this word that's outside, and then it can have either one of the things in parentheses. But that's a little bit of a fancy search, and like I said, if you're not comfortable doing that yet, just do separate searches. Okay, I could do a search for climate change and plastic, and then go back and do a search for global warming and plastic. All right, now, you are required to use peer-reviewed scholarly articles, so let's talk about how to find those and what they are. We are going to check this box over on the left-hand side that says scholarly peer-reviewed journals. So the database will automatically weed out some of those things that are not. So newspapers, magazines, it'll get rid of those for us. So you can see we went from 342 results down to 259 because it got rid of those non-scholarly articles. But you still need to understand what a scholarly article is and how to identify it. So let's take a moment to talk about that. I know you may have talked about it in class a little bit, but let's dig into that a little bit deeper. For an article to be considered peer-reviewed or scholarly, I use those terms interchangeably, it has to go through a process. So it starts when an author conducts some sort of study and writes an article. Now the study is going to look different in literature versus biology, but still, they'll conduct a study, they'll write an article. Then they're going to submit that article to a journal. The journal editor will send that article to 2 or 3 experts in the field. These are the peers. That's where the peer and peer review comes from. And those peers will review the article. They're going to ask questions. They're going to suggest revisions, ask for clarification. You know, why did you do this way? You should really include this author because they're an expert in the field and it's kind of an oversight that you missed them, that type of thing. They'll send the article back to the author to revise. And sometimes this process has to be repeated a few times before the article is recommended for a publication. Sometimes you can just go through the process once. But this process usually takes a few months. It's not a super quick experience by any means. But these articles are usually considered more credible because they have gone through this process. And so that's why we like to use those in academic papers. So the opposite of a scholarly article is a popular article, and that's probably more what you're used to seeing. And let's talk about some of the ways to identify the differences since you need to be able to locate scholarly sources for your paper. The popular sources, these are going to be things like magazines, newspapers, things that you would see in the grocery store checkout line, or most of what's shared on Facebook and Twitter as news articles. Those are written for the general public, so they're easier to understand. The language is written in a way that the average, high school graduate can understand it, and you don't have to be an expert on that subject to know what's going on. They're written by journalists, by bloggers, and not people who study that for a living. They're meant to entertain, to inform, sometimes to persuade. If you open it up, they're going to be glossy. They're going to have all these pretty photos and advertisements and colorful headlines. They're going to play with font a little bit, and it's all designed to catch your eye. Scholarly sources, on the other hand, are written for subject area professionals. So the language is written in a way that they assume you understand basic concepts in that field and that you have some of the common knowledge, and so they'll just gloss right over that. The authors are usually researchers or professors, people who study this for a living, and it's usually to present findings. So they did some sort of study and they want to tell you about it. This is what they found. Every single scholarly article is going to have a long list of references. Okay? No article is going to make it through that peer review process that we just talked about without having references. Okay? And you don't see that in newspapers or magazines. They don't tell you, we used this book and this article, and no. Generally speaking, they're going to look kind of dull, especially compared to, magazines and popular sources. They're going to have charts and graphs, not going to be super colorful. If they do have photos, it will be directly related to what their studies. So, maybe it's what they saw in their Petri dish or something. So they're more complex, not written for the everyday person. Let's take a look at what some of those examples would. So this is an example of a popular source. You can see it starts with a giant photograph. The title is really big, kind of flashy. The Big Melt, Climate Change in the Alps. It's made to grab your attention. Okay, if we looked at the language, it's going to be easy to read, easy to understand. This one has more photographs, very photo heavy. Okay, it's pretty short. There's an advertisement for something completely unrelated. There were no references at the end of this article. And lengthwise, it's very, very short. Now, if we go back and compare that to our scholarly source, so let's compare it to this. All right, so maladaptive plasticity facilitates evolution of thermal tolerance during an experimental range shift. So look at that title compared to The Big Melt. Okay, so you can see the difference already in the titles. But this article, it has an abstract. That is always a good indicator that something is peer-reviewed. I could Google this journal title, BMC Evolutionary Biology, to see if I could find on Google whether or not that was a peer-reviewed journal. And so the author works at the School of Biological Sciences at a university. So it's safe to assume that he's an expert in this field. It's got results, it's got methods, it's got a discussion and conclusions. Those are all good indicators that this is a peer-reviewed source. And then look at that long list of references there at the end. Okay, that is key. A peer-reviewed source is always going to have references. Now this one actually does tell me that it was received in March 2019, it was accepted in January 2020, and then published in April 2020. You're not always going to see that in an article, but that does let you know a little bit about what the peer review process was like for this article and how long it took. Okay, but you can see overall it's a lot more dull, and if I looked at the language, it would be a lot more difficult for me and you to understand this article because we don't have some of that base knowledge necessarily. That doesn't mean that we can't get the general idea of it. It's just written for people in that field. Now that we know what we're looking for when we look at these articles, let's take a look at some of them and how to navigate the actual database. So as you can see, there are a couple of different options. Some articles will have HTML full text, some will have the HTML and PDF full text, and some will just have the PDF full text. Okay, so the two big differences in those are that the HTML full text will just be basically a transcript of the article. So it gets rid of any charts and graphs and any kind of formatting and really just gives you the text of the article, which is sometimes easier from a reading perspective, but it does make it more difficult to cite because you can't actually tell what page something is on. But it does have some great accessibility features. So you can listen to the article. It will play the article for you. Or you can translate the article to another language if you're more comfortable. So that is HTML full text. The PDF full text you can get to by either clicking PDF full text or clicking on the article title. They'll both take you to the same place. And with PDF full text, it's literally just a scanned copy of the article. So it's all in there in its original formatting with all of the charts and graphs in their original locations. And any special formatting is done there. Now, I do want to point out that the databases have a citation feature. It's over here on the right-hand side. It's this little piece of paper. If you click on that, it's got different citations. It does have MLA. Now, these are not always correct, so make sure you double check it before you just copy and paste it into your paper. Now, I'm more comfortable with APA than MLA, so I can't just look at this one and tell you right off the bat if it's correct or not. But use it as a starting point, but double check it against OWL Purdue or some of the resources you've been given in class to make sure that's correct and make sure the formatting stays when you copy and paste it over. So that is the database in a nutshell. Like I said, the hardest part is figuring out those keywords and using those to find the results that you actually want. But as before, if you have any questions, please feel free to contact us. Use that RefDesk email, refdesk@columbiasc.edu, or This is me, Miss Hickey. Come find me in the library, and I will be happy to talk about your research with you and see how we can help you out.